Hi, I'm Tariq Melrose. When a politician says, "Let me be clear," just know you're about to hear anything but clarity. Today was no exception. Buzzwords, vagueness, and a conveniently missing context. But not here. I've got clarity, I've got clips, and I've got questions they can't dodge forever. Subscribe now, because asking the right question is the first step to accountability.
Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to smear Ukraine with Kremlin talking points, only to get obliterated by facts on live TV. Stick around for the full clip where we break down every GOP lie and expose their hypocrisy right here on Tariq Melrose Vlogs.
I think this is a very important hearing we're having today, and I'd like to take a little time to respond to some misinformation that has been spread here. Mr. Snyder, you said in your opening statement that the fact that there are neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian military is disinformation, a disinformation trope, and a Russian denazification meme. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record this 2021 Time magazine article titled "How a White Supremacist Militia Uses Facebook to Radicalize and Train New Members" about the Ukrainian neo-Nazi Azov Battalion.
Without objections ordered.
Thank you. Time also put together a piece only 3 years ago, and it's quite an extensive video that gives full information about the Nazis in Ukraine and their recruitment efforts that go all around the world. It's amazing to me that just in a few years' time, it's now considered misinformation to talk about the Nazis in Ukraine. I'd like to quote the article. It says that Ali Sufan, a security consultant and former FBI agent who has studied Azov Nazis, estimates that more than 17,000 foreign fighters have come to Ukraine over the past 6 years from 50 countries. According to Christopher Wray, the FBI director, he said that Azov has been recruiting and radicalizing and training American citizens for years. He also finished saying in his testimony to the U.S. Senate that American white supremacists are actually traveling overseas to train. This is an extremely concerning situation. I don't think anyone in the United States government, Americans, do not support actual Nazis or white supremacists. I know I certainly do not. And I can't understand why in just a short amount of time, this information that our own American media frequently talked about is no longer talked about. I'd like to point out also, here's an NBC article stating that Ukraine's Nazi problem is real. Mr. Snyder, do you see this headline? This is NBC News. They say that Ukraine's Nazi problem is real, even if Putin's denazification claim is not. So even our own American media, unless you consider NBC or Time Magazine misinformation spreaders or disinformation media outlets, this is contrary to what you testified. And there's frequent pictures all over, anybody can find them, of Nazis. Here they are. This looks like something you'd see out of Hitler's Germany from Ukraine. And this is something that's extremely important to talk about. According to the Council of Europe, however, Ukraine is ranked well in the top half of countries in terms of how corrupt they are. In the last 5 years, Ukraine is ranked close to the countries like Gambia, Iran, Myanmar, and Sierra Leone in corruption. That's not very free and democratic company to keep. Ukraine has canceled their elections, arrested members of the press, not allowed different types of religion unless it goes along with the Ukrainian government. And right now, the biggest push in Washington, D.C. is to fund the Ukraine war with another $60 billion. And while we're talking about the CCP, I think it's extremely important to point out that our own wide open border is the most dangerous threat to our national security. According to CBP data, there have been 24,296 Chinese nationals enter the United States at the southern border just this year in 2024. I want you to know that's up 7,000% since Biden took office in 2021, when only 342 Chinese nationals crossed our border. When we're talking about national security and talking about threats through the United States, Congress needs to remember that our open border is the greatest threat to the American people who, by the way, Monday was tax day, April 15th, when struggling Americans pulled together to pay their taxes or filed for extensions or paid money that they just didn't have and desperately are hoping for a tax return. The United States federal government is doing everything they can here in Congress, persuading members of Congress with every lobbyist from foreign countries and groups, trying to tell us to send $100 billion overseas, and we're doing nothing for our border. So when you want to talk about misinformation, Mr. Snyder, you might actually look a little closer to American media if you don't like what they're saying. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, does he have the opportunity to respond to the gentlelady?
Sure.
Yeah.
I didn't ask him a
Okay.
question,
No, her
Mr.
time's
Raskin.
expired.
You asked multiple questions.
I did not ask him a question.
You certainly did. You
Mr.
said, did you see this?
Time
Raskin.
has expired. Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Frost from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get into it, it's interesting to hear my colleague just now talk about disavowing white supremacists when in 2022, she spoke at an event led by white supremacist and white nationalist Nick Fuentes, and when asked about it, doubled down on it and said, we're going to focus on people, not labels. So get out of here with that damn hypocrisy. And Dr. Snyder, I'm going to give you some time to respond. Go ahead.
First of all, I'd like to thank the representative from Georgia by making clear with her comments and with her person that any discussion of political warfare has to include Russia, Ukraine, and America. She's just demonstrated that point, I think, very powerfully. On the question of Nazis, I've written 2 books as a historian about Nazis and the Holocaust. On the question of Ukrainian nationalism, I am the leading scholar of that subject in North America and have been writing about it for 20 years. If the chamber is interested in the degree of far-right participation in Ukrainian politics, you can be assured that no far-right party has ever crossed 3% in Ukrainian election. So of course there are bad people in every country, but by any comparative standard is a very small phenomenon. In Russia, on the other hand, the army includes openly Nazi formations, such as Rushich. The government itself is fascist in character, and it is carrying out a war which includes deportation of children by the tens of thousands, the open intention of destroying a state, as well as mass torture. So if we're looking for fascism, and if there is anyone who is sincerely concerned about halting fascism or racism, you would wish to halt Russia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Snyder. And, you know, this hearing was put together to talk about political warfare, and it's strange because a lot of my Republican colleagues seem to be pointing a lot of fingers, but not at Vladimir Putin and not holding him accountable. I mean, even top-ranking Republicans are having enough of it. Michael McCall said, quote, I think Russian propaganda has made its way into the United States. Unfortunately, it's infected a good chunk of my party's base, unquote. We just heard some of that right now. Republican Michael Turner, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, quote, we see directly coming from Russia attempts to mass communications that there are anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia messages, some of which we even hear being uttered on the House floor. Dr. Snyder, can you talk really quickly about some of the main narratives Russia uses when engaging in political warfare?
I appreciate this question because if we're going to talk about political warfare, we have to take into account the ways that countries cooperate. It's entirely artificial to say, here's China, here's America. That means that we leave aside Xinjiang, we leave aside Tibet, Hong Kong, Taiwan, New Zealand, Australia, Europe, all the places where China practices political warfare, and we leave aside Russia and Ukraine, which is where it matters the most. Political warfare is only political warfare if it passes through us. That is the intention. We've just seen an example of it passing through a person. It's only political warfare if it passes through us. What the Russians and the Chinese imitating the Russians try to do is to convince us that our system is no better than theirs, there's no point in voting, and we should support, if we support anyone at all, the person who's most likely to bring our system down. That's the point.
I really appreciate you bringing up the fact that it has to pass through us because we just heard it here from my colleague. And here's another tweet from the same colleague saying, anyone who votes to fund Ukraine is funding the most corrupt money scheme of any foreign war in our country's history. And if you look at where this is from the Strategic Culture Foundation, an online journal run by a Russian intelligence service that has been sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department for election interference. So we see it passing through us, and not just with the colleague that just spoke, but with many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And what Russian propaganda won't tell you is most of the money allocated for Ukraine is actually spent in America. 90% of it going to Americans. And so are these American companies that support Ukraine, are these allegations based on evidence, Dr. Snyder? And if not, where do these allegations against President Zelensky and his cabinet come from?
First of all, U.S. weapons are being used extremely efficiently on the Ukrainian battlefield. They're being audited in practice. Secondly, there is an American institution which does audit the way that is expended. Third of all, you're quite right. What the allocation of usually weapons that are about to be decommissioned anyway to Ukraine means is that we spend more on modern weapons inside the United States, which is why the defense industry is generally in favor of it. This trope of Ukraine being corrupt with respect to the weapons comes from a handful of Russian sources. There is no reason to think it. They're fighting for their lives. They're doing very well.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've got to let that sink in. We have members of the United States Congress using Russian disinformation to discredit Ukraine and help Russia. And I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Now we'll yield myself 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, before you do, can I just have one unanimous consent request?
Yes, sir.
This is an article answering our friend, the gentlelady from Georgia, the Azov Battalion, how Putin built a false premise for a war against Nazis in Ukraine, from CBS News.
Without objection, we'll add that. I also was speaking with the gentleman about 2 articles which I would wish to enter into the record. The label of which they would be Treasury targets large Chinese network of illegal drug producers, and secondly, a letter signed by over 50 members, including senators, to the Attorney General of the United States, dated February the 2nd, concerning Chinese nationals
Terrific.
Owning property here as it relates to growing marijuana. Without objection, those both will be entered into the record. Thank you to the panel that is here. Each of you have added content today that I consider very valuable and necessary for us to hear. I would like to, if I could, point to Colonel Newsham, if I...
What we just witnessed in this hearing was the political equivalent of Marjorie Taylor Greene walking into a chess match armed with a checkerboard. And Dr. Timothy Snyder didn't just beat her, he checkmated her in under 5 moves. She came in swinging with a stack of cherry-picked articles, Kremlin talking points wrapped in the American flag, and a thinly disguised attempt to undermine U.S. support for Ukraine. What she didn't count on was a world-renowned historian calmly dismantling her entire argument in real time. Greene tried the same tired MAGA formula. Take a fragment of truth, distort it beyond recognition, then present it as if it were gospel. She pulled out a 2021 Time magazine article, an NBC News headline, and a grab bag of stats meant to convince the audience that Ukraine is some Nazi-infested, corrupt wasteland undeserving of U.S. aid. And she mixed it with the Republican obsession of the week, the southern border, as if that somehow negates Russia's war crimes. This is classic right-wing misdirection. Use fear, wedge unrelated issues together, and hope no one notices the contradictions. But here's the thing. Greene's performance didn't just fail factually, it reeked of projection. Because when Representative Maxwell Frost reminded the room that Greene herself spoke at a white nationalist event led by Nick Fuentes in 2022, the hypocrisy was too loud to ignore. She says she doesn't support white supremacists, yet she literally headlined their conference. That's not just a bad look, it's proof she's playing a double game, pretending to condemn extremism while giving it a platform. Then came Dr. Snyder. This isn't some random witness. This is the leading scholar in North America on Ukrainian nationalism and the Holocaust. He's been studying far-right movements for decades. And his response was devastating to Greene's narrative. In Ukraine, no far-right party has ever crossed 3% in an election. In Russia, by contrast, the government is openly fascist. The military includes Nazi formations, and they're engaged in mass torture, child deportations, and an explicitly genocidal war. If you actually care about stopping fascism, Snyder argued, the logical priority is stopping Russia, not parroting their propaganda. Frost took that point further. He highlighted what senior Republicans like Michael McCaul and Michael Turner have been willing to admit. Russian propaganda has infected a large portion of the GOP base, and some of it is now being spoken on the House floor. Let's pause on that. Republican leadership is acknowledging that Russian talking points are coming out of their own members' mouths, and yet the party continues to tolerate it. That's not just ideological drift. That's foreign influence actively shaping American policy. Snyder then explained how Russian and Chinese political warfare works. It has to pass through Americans. The goal is to convince us our system is no better than theirs, to make us give up on democracy altogether, or to support leaders most likely to tear it down from the inside. And in that moment, Greene's own words became a textbook example of this process. She was the conduit, carrying Moscow's narrative straight into the Congressional record. Frost made the receipts even more damning. He pointed to a tweet from Greene, claiming anyone voting to fund Ukraine is supporting the most corrupt money scheme in our country's history. Where did that claim originate? From the Strategic Culture Foundation, an outlet run by Russian intelligence, sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury for election interference. In other words, Greene was reading from a Kremlin script, and she's not alone. Frost noted that many of his GOP colleagues are pushing the same Russian-born lies. Here's the part Russian propaganda won't tell you. Most U.S. funding for Ukraine never leaves America. 90% is spent here on American companies to produce the weapons and supplies Ukraine needs. It's an economic stimulus wrapped in a moral imperative, protecting democracy abroad while creating jobs at home. Snyder added that these weapons are being used effectively, audited for accountability, and in many cases were aging stock headed for decommission anyway. The Ukraine is stealing our weapons trope, straight from Russian disinformation channels with zero credible evidence. What's truly alarming is not just Greene's dishonesty, but her priorities. She wants to convince Americans that the real threat is helping Ukraine, not the actual fascist regime invading it. She downplays Putin's war crimes while inflating the scale of neo-Nazi influence in Ukraine beyond any reality. And she throws in border panic and IRS resentment to keep the MAGA base riled up. It's political performance art in the service of authoritarian interests, both foreign and domestic. This hearing was supposed to be about political warfare. What we saw was political warfare in action, not from a hostile witness, but from a sitting member of Congress, using her time to launder propaganda into the public record. And when confronted with her own alignment with white supremacists, she did what MAGA politicians do best, ignore the facts and bulldoze ahead with the script. The contrast could not be clearer. On one side, scholars, facts, bipartisan security concerns, and an understanding of the global stakes. On the other, a Republican Party so deep in the thrall of its own disinformation loop that Russian talking points have become standard floor speeches. And make no mistake, this is not just a Greene problem. She's a symptom of a larger rot in the GOP, where loyalty to the party line now means echoing the Kremlin if it helps hurt Democrats or undermine Biden. This is why the 2024 election matters so much. If Republicans take full control, expect more of this. More foreign propaganda shaping U.S. policy, more attacks on our alliances, and more erosion of the democratic institutions that protect us. Because MAGA's endgame isn't just to own the libs, it's to weaken the very system that holds leaders accountable, here and abroad. The lesson from this hearing? The fight for democracy isn't just happening on Ukrainian soil. It's happening in our own halls of Congress in real time. And the enemy isn't always speaking with a Russian accent. Sometimes they're wearing a congressional pin and claiming to represent the American people. Thanks for watching. This has been Tariq Melrose Vlogs, where we cut through the spin, call out the hypocrisy, and defend democracy one video at a time. If you value the truth and want to keep fighting back against MAGA extremism, Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. See you in the next one.